Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at another one of the tool kits in the Monsoon Hardline series of pro bending kits. This is the Heatgun or bending kit. If you've watched any of our mandrel or measuring tools series, you recognize the marks that I've got laid out here on my building board, and you recognize the mandrel. The mandrels in our bending kit, our mandrel bending kit, are machined from aluminum. They have a polished channel that the tube rides in. They have in-feet and out-feet legs to keep the tube nice and flat against whatever mandrel you're using. They come in a 180, a 90, a 360, and a 45. They also come in two sizes. This is the 5/8 by 16 millimeter nominal, and this is the 1/2 inch by 13 millimeter nominal. They're color coded to make it easy to identify between the two without having to stop and read anything. Because I've got the lengths of my legs marked out on this building board and my mandrel in place, it's going to make the bending much easier because I'm not doing it in my lap or free bending around a found item like a soup can or something. It's not to say you can't do that. The problem you're going to find is if you're doing a bend, you've got so many things going on at one time that you're heating the tube. You've got to get it heated in the right place and at the right temperature. And then if you've got this can in your hand or whatever that you're trying to bend around, you've got to make sure you haven't gone beyond what you wanted to bend, or you're not bending enough. You have to make sure that the legs are flat or on plane. So you don't want to end up with a situation where you've overbent and you've off plane, because then you'll have to go back and reheat the tube. And mostly, like I said, you can't do it that way, but it just adds a whole lot of stress to both you and to the acrylic you're bending. This is supposed to be fun, so my advice is to check out the mandrel and measuring kits. We also sell a miter box kit for cutting. Gives you nice smooth ends on the tube. Most of the time you'll find the difference between world-class results and mediocre results. It's not necessarily the guy doing the work, it's the tools that guy's using. So my advice is to check out the other videos. What we're going to be doing today is just heating up a piece of tube and showing you about the right point where you want to bend it, and then showing you how to walk it around the bend, and basically just watching it tends to help you learn how to do things like that. There is a bit of a learning curve to bending tube because it's kind of a hand skill. It's not very steep. My advice to you, if you've never bent tube before, is to just buy an extra stick or two when you're buying your tube, so you've got a few pieces to practice with. Usually by the time you've got two bends under your belt, you're going to be pretty good at this, so it's not that big of a deal. The other thing that comes with before I get into any of this, I want to remind you that the cotton gloves that come with the Heatgun, they're not there for decoration. The tube does get hot enough to burn you. You just absolutely positively need to make sure you're wearing the gloves anytime you're working with the Heatgun. And also, although it doesn't put out a lot of heat, if you leave it pointed at something that's combustible for any length of time, there is the potential for whatever that item is to ignite. So they are tools, they're not toys. Just kind of use them with a little bit of common sense and you'll be fine. The other item that comes in the kit are these molded silicone rods. These slide inside the tube to prevent you from collapsing it while you're bending it. This just hit the floor a few minutes ago, so it's a little dirty. You're going to make sure this is clean before you put it inside your tube. The same thing applies to the tube itself. Before you start bending, you're going to want to make sure you wipe it down really good. The reason we do that is we want to make sure that there's no contaminants on the tube that could cause, like you can see I've got some tape residue or something right there. I'll wipe that off real good. A little spit won't hurt anything. Also, if you've been cutting on the tube, there might be little plastic fragments or pieces that have gone inside the tube. You're going to want to make sure you take the time to go over the sink and wash those out and let the tube dry off. Just because if they get too warm, they might actually melt to the inside of the tube. Obviously, we're going to this effort to have a beautiful bend. We want to make sure that it looks real nice. The goal that we're after is a tube that's got a beautiful, consistent diameter bend all the way around. If you look at the legs are going to be nice and straight. There's no wobble. That's we kind of basically want this military precision, a beautiful piece of bent tube. If you are free bending, the chances of you getting results like this are going to go down dramatically. And my advice to people is if you don't really care about how things look, you're almost just as well off using the soft tube, because what makes this beautiful is the fact that you have all this control over these beautiful bends. Got a piece here that didn't come out correctly. It's got a few of the typical errors. This was free bent around something like I talked about. If you look at this area of the tube, you can see the tube is collapsed a little bit. It's kind of wobbly like I mentioned. This area over here, the outside of the tube was actually heated up warm enough, but the inside of the tube wasn't quite warm enough, and as it was forced around the bend, it caused a kink right here. These are worst case scenarios. You're very unlikely to see this, but as long as you're heating the tube nice and evenly and you bring the temperature up not too quickly, do your bend and then let it cool nice and evenly, you're not going to build a lot of stresses into the plastic. If you don't, if you're over here doing your bend and you feel it's starting to get resistance, stop, don't force it. You can always go back and just heat it up a little bit more, get it to the correct temperature again, come back, line the tube up on your mark and finish the bend. There's really no reason why you can't heat and reheat the tube 2 or 3 times. I wouldn't do 5 or 6 necessarily, because every time you heat the tube, no matter how hard you try, you're going to heat and cool it a little bit unevenly, and each time you do that it does build a little bit of stress into the acrylic. If you're doing it 5 or 6 times, you could build enough stress in that down the road you'll see some stress fractures in the plastic. It's not a huge deal, I wouldn't worry about it, but obviously be aware of it. Because I've got my mandrel on the table and I've got my marks that show me the length of each leg, I can go to my scrap bin, pick a piece of tube out, kind of just walk it around, check, make sure I've got enough plastic, that piece is long enough. I'm going to insert the molded silicone and again wrap it around. I'm going to pull that rod back out until it's about 1 inch from the end, just so I know. And another thing I like to do, and this is optional, you don't have to do it, I've lined up so I've got a little bit of extra past the leg right here, and I'm going to come back and cut that off after I do my bend. I'm going to make a little mark right here, about right there. I'm using just a regular lead pencil. I'm going to walk that mark around the tube. All this is going to let me do is kind of have an idea of where I want to heat the tube. What you're going to find after you've sat down with your heat gun and you're looking at your tube, you're going to go, oh man, where was I supposed to heat that at? Because it gets a little confusing to try and tell along there. This just gives me a little indication I want to heat from here to here. Obviously don't use a magic marker or any type of tape or anything, because as it gets warm it will cook itself to the acrylic. The lead in the pencil seems to resist the heat just fine and it wipes off. So the heat gun's going to be a little bit loud, so you may or may not be able to hear me, so I'm going to kind of walk you through what I'm doing first and then I'll go ahead and do it. But I'm essentially just going to hold the tube up to the heat gun about this far away, about 50 millimeters or so, 2 inches. You're going to see me walk it back and forth. See a little thing here in the tube I missed, sorry. You're going to see me walk it back and forth, and as I'm walking it back and forth, I'm going to be rotating the tube around. After a minute or two, you're going to see me kind of give a little test bend. It'll be a little bit flexible at that point. Into about 2 minutes, you'll see that it's relatively flexible. That's where most people doing their first piece of tube think, oh, it must be okay, and I'll try that. And then they start their bend, and it gets a little bit of way around, and then it's cooled off too much, and they can't finish the bend. When you're at the point where the tube will almost just, this isn't quite long enough maybe, but it'll bend, start bending under its own weight, that's when you know you're correct. You're at the right temperature. All right, here we go. Camera stopped there for some reason, sorry. All right, here we go. It's just like I talked about. I'm holding it about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, about 30 to 50 millimeters from the end of the heat gun. You don't want to heat one spot too quickly or too much. You don't want to stop, or you could cause little bubbles to form in the acrylic. What I'm trying to do is just heat it nice and evenly. I'm going between my 2 marks. You can already see it's starting to be a little tiny bit flexible. I occasionally see guys that are using those 3,000 watt. This is a 1,500 watt heat gun. I see those guys that are using 3,000 watts or more, the type of heat guns that are designed for stripping off paint or lifting floor tiles. You really just don't want to do that, because if you heat the plastic too rapidly and cool it off too rapidly, you're going to find that you are building a lot of stress into the plastic. So the goal is to heat it nice and slow, nice and even. You see it's already starting to be a little bit flexible. That's the point where most guys on their very first bend think they're okay and try too soon. Getting there, about another couple of minutes and we'll be ready. I'm also trying to make sure I heat the entire distance between those 2 points so that they're all at the right temperature. The whole area is at the right temperature. I don't know if it'll show, but it's actually bending on its own weight right there. That's kind of where we want to be. Just give it another little quick pass over the whole length to make sure I'm nice and evenly heated. I'm going to turn the heat gun off, put the tube by my marks, and just walk it right around nice and evenly. Hold it in place. Another thing I notice is people think that they probably shouldn't touch the area where they've heated. Obviously you shouldn't do that if you're not wearing the gloves, but if you've got the gloves on, it doesn't hurt anything at all to just hold that area. You want to keep moving your hands a little bit because it's a little bit warm. And you don't want to ever quench the tube or spray it with water or anything like that to try and cool it off more quickly. That will definitely build stress into the plastic. You want to let it cool nice and evenly on its own. That feels like a nice bend. Another nice thing about the mandrels is at this point I can hold it with one hand and I've got a free hand to change the song playing or take a quick call or whatever. You don't have to, if you're holding a coffee can or something in the air, you're trying to hold everything and keep it square like I said. This building board you see me bolted on to here, this is a 1/2 inch MDF. It's the cheapest type of plywood you can get. You can use anything, but if you go down to your local big box building store, it's about $7 or $8, depending on where you live, $7 to $10 for a 2 foot by 2 foot pre-cut square. They're real handy to have for other things. You can use them to spray paint on or any number of other things that you're going to do with your build. Make nice little work surfaces. It's almost cool enough. I'm going to give it just another minute or so here. I don't know if you can see, but I'm actually dead on my center lines that we made. I think we're there. Pull the insert out. Take my little blue cloth and give it a nice good wipe down. And again, if you look at the top of that, it's a perfectly straight leg. Perfectly straight leg. The bend itself is, it stayed very close to the correct dimension all the way around. There's not a lot of distortion in it. If you look through the plastic, it's just real clear to look through. That's kind of the goal. If you have any questions on this or any of the other kits, you can stop by www.monsooncooling.com. Shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. Again, there's several other kits in this series. There's videos in this series on the other kits. There's a video on the mandrels, a video on the measuring tools. There's a video on cutting your tube. Just about anything you need to know we're trying to cover in a video so you guys know what to expect. You're all set.